Well, I apologize for my ineptness with electronics.
It's been a couple of weeks, we're out of practice.
Yeah, and I am way out of practice, or if I ever knew. It's my pleasure to introduce today Reverend Dr. Steve Haynes, although actually he doesn't need an introduction. We're all know Steve, and he is well known to us at this class and at our while. He is the Albert Bruce Curry Professor of Religious Studies at Rhodes College, as well as the Theologian in Residence here at Idlewild. He holds a PhD in Religion and Literature from Emory University and the MDiv from Columbia Seminary, as well as a Master's from Florida State University and a Bachelor's from Vanderbilt. Lots of degrees. Steve has been at Rhodes since 1989, and he's offered courses on the Holocaust, the Bible and its reception, religion and reconciliation, and religion and addiction. He also has research interests in Jewish-Christian relations, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and the biblical justifications for slavery and segregation. He has received a number of awards, including the Clarence Day Award for Outstanding Research and the Clarence Day Award for Outstanding Teaching. He also has published extensively, and I'm not going to read all of that long list, but his most recent book is Why Can't the Church Be More Like an AA Meeting and Other Questions Christians Ask About Recovery. And he will be sharing some of that topic with us this morning. But before I turn it over to Steve, I'm going to ask that we bow our heads in prayer. Before we do that, is there anybody who has some concerns that they'd like to? Well, I have one. I'd like to ask for prayers for my brother-in-law, John Meadows, and his wife, my sister Jenny, who's a member of our. So let us pray. Holy God, we are grateful this morning for the opportunity to gather and to learn together. We ask that you grant us open and receptive minds and hearts as we study together, and may what we learn today bear fruit in our lives to your greater glory. Lord, we remember before you today those known to us who need your care and blessing. John Nevels and Jenny Nevels, and also Mary Edith Walker, who's a member of our class. All these things we ask in the name of the Savior, Jesus Christ, our Savior. Amen.
Good to see everybody. It's so strange to be back in this space, face to face with people. I did online Sunday school for about a year. Some of you may have been in that class. I got used to it. Got used to doing church online. It's strange to be back. It's really nice. And you're in proximity with other people. So I was asked, I think it was last summer, to do something for Faith and Function. Hey, Jenny, we figured it out. Thanks for coming and checking on us, though. Really appreciate that. And I thought, well, by that time, my book should be out, so I'll just talk about that. That was just enough, and hopefully it'll be interesting to people. So as it turned out, it came out in October, just about a month ago, a little over a month ago. You can tell by the topic, by the title, it's a little different than other things I've written. In fact, it's quite different than other things I've written. It has nothing to do with Dietrich Bonhoeffer or American religion, religious history, biblical justifications for slavery, anything like that, Holocaust. So how the heck did I come to write a book with the title, Why Can't Church Be More Like an AA? Which is, I think we all agree, kind of provocative, but the whole book, really. Actually, the book at one point, so I think ultimately it was 90-something thousand words. At one point it was 150,000 words. I had to cut about 40% of it because obviously you can't have books that big, no one will read them. The point is there was a lot to say. There was a lot of things that could have gone in. So today I want to explain how it is I came to be interested in this topic, and then next week I'll talk more about the question itself, why people, by the way, it's not just my question. This is a question that I sort of discovered out there. It's been asked off and on since the 1940s. AA sort of came into existence in the mid-1930s. The big book, it's usually referred to as the big book of AA, was published in 1939. Already, almost by that time, people in the church were asking, what can church, sometimes the question took the form, existence, when it's such a spiritual / religious entity? So these are questions that that people have been asking a long time. I'll talk more specifically about the question next time. Today I want to talk about how I came to be interested in this topic. This is going to be very personal. It's going to reflect my own experience, which I'm going to share with you. A lot of you know the story, but probably most of you don't. So I'll just start at the beginning, which for me was, well, before I get there, here's the title, the contents page. I don't know how well you can read from where you're sitting. If you can't read anything of this, you might want to move up because a lot of the slides are going to be about the size. The first chapter is called Why Can't Sunday Be More Like Saturday? It's kind of provocative, isn't it? What can the church learn from AA? Do Christians need recovery? Are AA and the church allies or competitors? What is recovery anyway? Is recovery anti-Christian? Is recovery biblical? Can Christians embrace recovery? How are Christians reclaiming what the church gave AA? What does the church bring to recovery? Does 12-step recovery work? What about sex addiction? And then finally, epilogue, when is recovery finished?
Steve?
Yeah.
The microphone for the people that are on Zoom is right there. So they're having a little bit of trouble hearing you. So
That's right there, and you're
Yes.
having trouble hearing me?
yes.
Okay. So I'll try to speak up a little bit. How's that?
That might be better.
Okay.
We've muted them all.
Okay. So this is from the back of the book. This is a quotation from the book that kind of, in the back of the book, they want to try to give people a sense of what's in there that they might be tempted to buy. If Christians long for authentic spirituality rooted in fellowship and mutual healing, why not learn from groups that are committed to a way of life built on these values? That's kind of the thesis of the book, which is that AA, and by the way, AA in this case stands for all 12-step groups. There are dozens of them. You're probably familiar with many of them. Adult Children of Alcoholics, Al-Anon, Sex Addicts Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, and on and on. If these groups provide things that the church also values, then why not learn from these groups how they pull it off, right? How they bring people together who are strangers to each other and sort of bind them through this sense of connection and rigorous honesty and authenticity that many people do not find in church communities. So that's kind of the hook for the book. So it starts for me in 2008. So I don't know if you guys remember 2008. Seems like a long time ago. So I won't say how old I was, but I had kids who had a senior in high school and a freshman in high school, and I had a 3-year-old. Elise, my wife, found herself in a situation where she could no longer ignore the results of trauma from her childhood. As if you know anything about trauma, and I know it's increasingly a subject that a lot of people talk about, anything about it, it does not go away. It doesn't get better just because time is something that sort of settles into your body. It's triggered in various ways. It's something that has to be resolved for you to sort of go on. And there's a lot of attention now to what's called ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, right? So there's a lot of focus on childhood trauma and the way it sort of reveals itself in adult life. This is what Elise was facing, right? She just couldn't, and I think some of it may have been precipitated by having a child, Brayden, but at any rate, she needed a place where she could go that was dedicated to helping her resolve these places, these problems. And so she found a place called the Meadows. Thank God for the Meadows. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's a place in Arizona. Very nice, as you can see. It specializes in addiction and trauma. And she went for a standard inpatient kind of stint, which I think is 42 days. And this was in October of 2008. She ended up staying for another 3 months in a special
place they have there called the Melody House, which is dedicated to women who have experienced various forms of trauma to heal. So she went to exactly the place she needed to be. But we were without her for 5 months. It's a long time to be away from patient treatment. And especially when you have a 3-year-old, it's a long time to try to explain to a 3-year-old where the mom is. But the thing that really affected me most deeply was the Meadows family program. So I didn't know this. Maybe you're aware of it. I didn't know it. Since the early 1970s, people who deal with trauma and addiction have realized that addiction is a family disease. It's not a disease of an individual person. And so if you have an addict in a family or somebody who's got mental illness or whatever the presenting problem is, it's not just a problem of that person. Typically, that person is the identified patient, and all the focus is on that person. But if you take that person out of the family system, it's still a sick system. Even if that person gets sober, it's still a sick system, right? People will adjust and sort of try to figure things out around this system that's flawed, regardless of whether the person at the center of it, person who's been at the center of it, is still there. That, I didn't know that. That would have been helpful going into this. Meadows does a family week. Most inpatient places do a family weekend, a couple of days. They did a whole week, and I was the only member of the family who went. So it was like a week of inpatient treatment for me. And there was a lot of focus on me. I was not prepared for that. I went to help Elise like a good husband. And it turns out there was a lot of focus on me, my role in the family, my own unaddressed issues, all that. It was a hellish week for me. It was really difficult. I came back sort of a shell of myself. It was right at the end of our semester. I was pretty useless the rest of the semester, but I did have the sense to realize that I needed to, before Elise came home, I needed to get into some sort of regular therapeutic practice that would help me deal with the issues that had been revealed when I was out in Arizona. So I happened to know somebody from Idlewild who had mentioned to me that he had found somebody locally that dealt with trauma and addiction that was really good. And so you could hit a rock from it from here. It's called the Experiential Healing Center, and it's right over there. I'd been at Idlewild 10 years at that point, and by that point I'd never even heard of the place, but it's on Lockett Place right over here. And this is its website. You wouldn't know much from just looking about the website or what they do. But the two people that founded this practice are Kent Fisher and Michelle Rappaport. Michelle's been over here to do Sunday school classes in the past. You may have met her, Kent may have as well. Ken is the author of a book called Emotional Harmony, subtitle which is Using SOMAX, Systematic Experiential Intervention to Repair and Transform Your Life. So their basic modality, as you know, therapists do a lot of different stuff depending on their training. Kent and Michelle sort of developed their own modality. It has to do with the role of trauma and the way it affects the body and sort of sticks in the body, and ways to resolve it through sort of living or going through traumatic situations to sort of repair them, to sort of rethink them, re-experience them. I don't know if any of this makes any sense, but if you've ever, those of you who took psych in college, did you ever study psychodrama? Anybody remember psychodrama, what that is?
I majored in psychology, but
Okay.
exactly. It's been a long time.
Yeah, go ahead. So psychodrama was developed in the early 20th century. The idea is basically that people heal together, and that when people in a group play roles like members of somebody's family or acquaintances, they can help people work through trauma and sort of find a new way to kind of live their lives. So this is something that was adopted by Kent and Michelle, something very strange to me. Seemed very touchy-feely, very kind of frou-frou. I'm a very left brain guy. It was way outside my comfort zone, but I had this sense of luck to realize that this was a place that was going to be necessary for my healing. So I started going there. So when Elise came home in March of 2009, she started going to see these folks as well. And they sort of brought us into their fold. And we did couples counseling. This is a stock photo of couples counseling that pretty much describes what the experience is like for a lot of people, right? One person's describing how the other person has failed to, be a good spouse, and the other person's like, why am I here? So this is kind of where we were. We were in a very difficult place. Things were worse actually than they had been when Elise left, because at least we had kind of adjusted to the way things were, and now there was lots of stuff that was revealed that was really hard. Toothpaste that was hard to put back in the tube. So it was suggested that we undergo a therapeutic separation. I'd never heard that term. I still don't like it, but there it is. So she moved into an apartment, and Braden, who was 4 by now, sort of went back and forth. This was not something I was fond of. Those of you who know me know that I was divorced in 1999, had 2 kids from that marriage who were and are very traumatized by that whole experience. I was named parent for several years, but their mother was not really stable, and so they had a lot of issues. I did not like the idea of recapitulating that situation. On the other hand, an even worse outcome was divorce, because I knew what that would do to Braden, because I'd seen it with my other kids. So we kind of made do. And the thing they said we needed to do, one of the things they said we needed to do, one was keep doing couples counseling. They said we needed to attend a group called Recovering Couples Anonymous. I'd never heard of Recovering Couples Anonymous. I'm guessing you haven't either. It's a 12-step group patterned on AA, and it's for couples who have issues that they can't work through themselves. Usually addiction, at least on one side, maybe both, but it's the problems that are represented are there are many, and they sort of define the scripture. So we said, okay, we'll do that. When is it? They said, well, it's Saturday at 5 o'clock. I thought that's a really bad time for a meeting. I really do not, especially in the fall, football season. That seems to sort of cramp my style. But of course, that wasn't a good excuse. Here's a list of all the Saturday meetings in the world of RCA. Okay. The point of this is to indicate that the fact that Memphis has an RCA chapter is pretty amazing. There aren't very many in the US. I think there's the nearest one is Atlanta, and then Dallas in the other direction. So it's very unusual that a city this small or of our size has an RCA chapter. And it's really because Kent and Michelle started it at one point. So here's our group, Together in Hope, Shady Grove Road, meets at Shady Grove Presbyterian Church. So we went, and it was weird because we were sitting in a room about a little smaller than this, tables and chairs, about 25 or 30 people. We didn't know any of them. And we were there for reasons that we didn't want to talk about. And we didn't really want other people to know about. RCA has a concept. RCA is very familiar with that sort of feeling, and it's called coupleship shame. We had a lot of shame about where we were. We had been married for almost 10 years at that point, and we're at a difficult spot. We didn't know how we would go forward. We didn't know where we would get help. We were afraid to talk to anybody at church about it, because frankly, that hadn't been our experience, that was a safe thing, not just at Idlewild, but Elise grew up a Methodist minister's kid. The last place you want to share your personal stuff is in the church. She had a lot of bad experiences with that. So we went and we kind of did what was asked of us. So here's the preamble. for Recovering Couples Anonymous. By the way, every 12-step fellowship has a big book. Doesn't necessarily have to be big, but it is its own distinctive sort of version of the AA Big Book. And this one looks like this. Ours is a fellowship of recovering couples. We suffer from many addictions and dysfunctions, and we share our experience, strength, and hope with each other that we may solve our common problems and help other recovering couples restore their relationships. The only requirement for membership is the desire to remain committed to each other and develop intimacy. And that's pretty typical of 12-step groups, that there's the only requirement for membership is a desire, in the case of AA, to stop drinking. That's it. You don't have to be sober. You don't have to even really want to be sober. You just sort of have to want to be sober. So we qualified. We were committed to each other. And we certainly had work to do in terms of intimacy. There are no dues or fees for membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. We are not allied with any organization. We do not wish to engage in any controversy, either endorse nor oppose any causes. Although there is no organizational affiliation between AA and our fellowship, we are based on the principles of AA. Our primary purpose is to stay committed in loving and intimate relationships and to help other couples achieve freedom from dysfunctional relationships. So this is it. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. It's based on the principles of AA. In many cases in RCA, one member of the couple is familiar with AA or NA, and so they kind of know the drill. They know what it's like to be in a 12-step meeting, but typically the other person is not and doesn't want to be there, and makes that clear through their body language. The typical scenario is that somebody has screwed up big time. Somebody's done something that is potentially devastating to the marriage, and the therapist for this couple says, before you split, before you throw in the towel, try RCA. People will go, and you can tell the person who's there, just because they said they would go, they don't have a lot of hope. And then if they stick it out, you see things sort of slowly thaw. And typically what happens is that couples come in like this. One person is well above the other because the other one's really messed up. And a relationship like this doesn't work very well. You probably figured that out already in life, right? As long as someone is constantly, feeling inferior to the other, this is not going to work. So one of the goals of RCA is to sort of bring people on the same level, and you do that by convincing both members of the couple that they have stuff to work on, that they have a role in what's happened in the marriage. This is really tough to convince people who feel like a victim, who feel like the other person is the one who ought to be, the focus. So it's work and it takes time, but that's how it starts. So because I was going to ask you guys to read. Can anybody see this far? Can you see well enough to read? Okay, you can, great. So somebody read. This is if you went to an RCA meeting, so you get the preamble, that'd be the first thing. And then how it works, part 1, and then the 12 steps, and then how it works, part 2, and then you go into the meeting part. So I thought we'd just do the readings. So somebody read how it works, part 1.
Okay.
Out loud.
Well,
Yeah.
rarely have we seen a couple fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands mutual and rigorous honesty. There are those, too, who cannot or will not make a commitment to their partner. There are those who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. If you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. At some of these, we have balked. We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that we deal with addictions, cunning, baffling, powerful. We also deal with all the memories of past hurts, misbehavior, and vows violated. Without help, our anger, hurt, and mistrust are too great for us. But there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find God now. Half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked God's protection and care with absolute abandon. Here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery.
Thank you. What strikes you there? Anything? What do you notice? Surprising?
It's challenging.
Which part?
Well, kind of.
Yeah, it's very serious, right? Yeah. This is taken right out of the AA book with a few emendations. So it's the same idea. We've got a solution, not the only solution. We've got a solution to your problem, and just about anybody can make it work for them. But you got to be honest. That's really the fundamental requirement. You got to start with rigorous honesty. Even people who suffer from mental illness, right? You wouldn't think would be able to get better, have gotten better in this program. So this is the promise, right? This is part one. So somebody, the next step is the 12 steps of RCA, which are a very lightly edited version of the 12 steps of AA. So somebody read those.
One, we admitted we were powerless over our relationship, and our lives together had become unmanageable. 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to commitment and intimacy. 3, we made a decision to turn our wills and our life together over to the care of God as we understood God. 4, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of our relationship together as a couple. 5, we admitted to God, to each other, and to another couple the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character, communication, and caring. 7, we humbly asked God to remove our shortcomings. 8, we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, we made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, we continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it to our partner and to others we had harmed. 11, we sought through our common prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood God, praying only for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out. 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to other couples and to practice these principles in all aspects of our lives, our relationship, and our families.
Thanks, Daniel. So what do you notice about the steps? Perhaps you've seen it before, but what do you notice in this reading?
Very God-oriented.
Very God-oriented. 6 of the 12 steps have the word God in it, right? That doesn't even refer, that is, they include number 2, power greater than ourselves, which many people take to be God. So if you're coming at this from a Christian perspective, or somebody who's been socialized in the church, it seems very familiar, right? It seems very comfortable. On the other hand, if you're coming from, if you're a person who's had a bad church experience, been traumatized in the church, who's trying to get away from church, it can be difficult to sort of find a way. This is probably the case for a lot of folks that I know in 12-step groups. So they really have to struggle with how do I understand the God language in the 12 steps in a way that doesn't sort of trigger all the bad memories I have about church, the bad feelings I have about institutional origin. So these are the 12 steps, and in RCA, you work the steps as a couple. The only thing that's harder than working the steps is working the steps as a couple. Lisa and I just met with a couple last night. So you can, one of the things about 12-step recovery is that you work the steps with a sponsor, and you have somebody sort of guide you through the process. You do that in couples in RCA. So last night we were meeting with a couple who, they couldn't get started on the steps because this won't surprise you. So the steps are sort of, they follow questions, like what, describe your family of origin, right? So the husband would describe his family of origin, the wife would say, well, you left out such and such, right? And and that's not a good dynamic. So they have to sort of work through that. But these are the steps that apply, and it's tough. And in RCA, the first 3 steps, once you do them, you share them with the group. So in a group meeting, you're talking to relative strangers about your family of origin, your failures as a spouse, your fears, your addictions, your dysfunctions, all this stuff. So talk about rigorous honesty. There's this, from the moment you walk in, you hear people talk about their sort of deepest, darkest secrets, and you learn more about them than often their families do. So it's a very, it's an environment that's conducive to rigorous honesty because everybody practices it. And this is the second part of that follows the steps. This is a little bigger. Somebody probably can see this more easily. Somebody read it?
Many of us exclaimed, "What an order! We can go through. We cannot go through with it. Our love is lost, our vows forever violated, our communication destroyed, our families broken beyond repair. Do not be discouraged. No couple among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. Our love is not perfect. Our energy not unbounded, nor our relationships ideal. There is no such thing as the ultimately caring and nurturing partner or perfect intimacy. Our point is that we are willing to grow together along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. In our spirituality, we claim the goal of greater caring, communication, and intimacy. Our understanding of our addictions, dysfunctions, and our personal histories before and after recovery make clear 3 pertinent ideas. Number 1, our relationship had become unmanageable, that despite our best efforts, we were headed for separation and/or divorce. Number 2, that probably no human power could have restored us to commitment and intimacy. And number 3, that God could and would if God were sought.
What do you notice?
We're out of control.
Yeah. Unmanageability is one of the features. Powerlessness and unmanageability are the essence of step 1, right? You have to acknowledge whatever you're struggling with. You're powerless to fix it, and it's causing unmanageability in your life. Your life's not sustainable going forward in the current circumstances. But notice how God is so central here. So it all comes back after the 12 steps to 3 things. Our relationship had become unmanageable. We were headed for separation or divorce. No human power could fix us. God could and would if God were sought. So for people like Elisa and I, who had grown up in the church and who felt like God was probably our only answer, this seemed like a good place for us, right? And an anonymous space where people didn't know us anyway, but they weren't going to talk about our stuff, to other people. So we kept going. And one of the things that helped us a lot was the safety guidelines for RCA, because when you're in a relationship, in an intimate relationship that has problems, it's sometimes difficult to avoid those problems. They come up, right? The meeting I was present at last night, the topic was baiting and button pushing statements, right? So baiting the other person, pushing their buttons, taking their inventory, doing things that cause conflict. The safety guidelines help kind of alleviate that fear that, if we say anything of importance, we're going to fight. I'll read the safety guidelines. Anonymity and mutual respect of boundaries are essential to providing a healing experience to each of us. Most of us have had great difficulty establishing our boundaries. Assertiveness and personal space. We are sensitive to crosstalk. Our purpose is not to give advice or try to fix one another, but rather to create a safe environment where we can experience and share our pain. Not the only thing you could do to really get in trouble with a 12-step meeting is crosstalk. Anybody know what that is?
We'll start with the second.
No, that's not what it is. That makes perfect sense, though. Yeah, We don't want to interrupt people, obviously. What is crosstalk? Why would it be out? Why would it be such a taboo?
You're not talking about just talking to people outside of the group.
Doesn't have anything to do with anonymity. This has to do with sharing inside the group, offering advice, helping people, commenting on people. Yeah, big no-no. And if you do it, someone will speak up and say, remind you, no crosstalk, right? You don't respond to other people's shares. You may, use it as a kind of, jumping off point for something you want to say, but you don't speak directly to people. This is a really interesting phenomenon because I think everything in us as church people suggests we should help each other. We should offer advice. We should fix. I know I have a Christ care group, and this is our instinct. Somebody has a problem. We all want to line up to fix them, right? That's not really what they need. They just need a place to talk about it and be heard. So crosstalk is a real no-no. We have found that it is okay to feel. It is okay to make mistakes. It's okay to have respectful conflict. This is a big one, right? Because a lot of people think that fighting is the first step to divorce. If we disagree, somehow we're going to end up splitting. It's okay to have needs and ask for them to be met. It's important to respect others. It's important to avoid self-righteous statements. Here's the part that we talked about last night: baiting or button pushing statements, case building statements, and the taking or sharing of another person's inventory. What does that mean to you?
Sharing other people's personal information, personal story.
Yeah, and their inventory is like what's wrong, what's really the
Oh,
root
their
problem of somebody.
vulnerabilities.
Yeah, so your addictions, your dysfunctions, you don't share that about your spouse, right? That's their, as you say, that's their story, right? But it's really tempting, right? And I've seen it happen in meetings where people want to sort of let everybody else know what a schmuck their spouse is. It's important to respect ourselves and avoid self-pretense, self-pity. It's helpful to take ownership of our own story and take credit for our progress and work recovery. Anonymity is our spiritual foundation. Who you see here, what you hear here, when you leave here, let it stay here. And then the corporate response is here. This is really important. Anonymity is often misunderstood, I think. So I am not breaking anonymity today, even though I'm talking about my involvement in a 12-step meeting. One can do that. If I were to talk about anybody else I saw there, or what somebody else said, that would be breaking anonymity. But anonymity isn't just about keeping people's identity quiet. It's also about humility. Because in AA, when it started in the 1930s, you had a bunch of very successful, highly driven men who had the humility of alcoholism kind of catch up with them, the humiliation. And they realized that when they got together, if they talked about, even if they used their last names, and if they talked about what firm they worked for or what they had accomplished, that was counterproductive. They needed to go first name basis, and they needed not ever kind of lead with what I do or what I've accomplished. So anonymity is partly about humility. As a result, it's a weird thing. I was talking to somebody the other day, somebody I've known in recovery for 10 years, and we were exchanging phone information. He says, by the way, what's your last name? It's pretty odd, isn't it? To know somebody that long and not know their last name. But it's not unusual. We have care and concern for ourselves and our coupleships. We need to both receive and provide. The nurturing our relationships need to grow and endure. For that reason, it's important for us to act and speak respectively to our partners and others. As we do this, we value the group and the relationships in it. The highlight of every meeting for me is the reading of the promises. And every 12-step meeting that you can whatever go to would conclude with the promises right before the sort of reciting of the Serenity Prayer. This is taken from the AA Big Book. It is, if you really think about, we're going to read it, if you think about what is promised, it's pretty remarkable. Because if it's true, if these promises are true, if they can be counted on to be realized, then this is a powerful thing you're involved in. It's something the church should certainly be interested in. Step 12 talks about a spiritual awakening, and that's really the goal of all 12-step groups. The goal of AA is not to stop drinking. The goal of AA is to develop a way of life based in spiritual experience in which alcohol is not necessary. The goal of NA is not to stop taking drugs. It's to develop a way of life on spiritual principles that doesn't require substances, right? So this is what the promise is. Does somebody want to read? I feel like you kind of like my undergraduates. They're not really into reading aloud. It's okay. Anybody? Okay. Can't say, well, that is slow. So I'll read. It's a little less clear over here. If we are honest about our commitment and painstaking about working the 12 steps together, we will quickly be amazed at how soon our love returns. So imagine somebody coming into an RCA meeting. They're in a situation of crisis, right? Something terrible has happened. Their sort of last resort is going to a meeting where they can talk about it and be honest about it. The first line of the promise is we will be quickly amazed at how soon our love returns. So that's really something people can, it keeps people coming back. We're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will learn how to play and have fun together. As we experience mutual forgiveness, we will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. Trust in each other will return. We will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. No matter how close to brokenness we have come, we will see how our experiences can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness, shame, and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our partners, families, and others. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook on life will change. Fear of people and economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will be better parents, workers, helpers, and friends. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we cannot do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. For those of you who are new to our fellowship, there are no problems that you have experienced that are not common to many of us. Just as our love for our partners has been imperfect, we may not always be adequately able to express to you the deep love and acceptance we feel for you. Keep coming back. The process of loving and communication grows in us and with each other one day at a time. Remember always what is said to your When you hear promises,
It's just so beautiful and optimistic.
it's a lot of hope. I think that the word people use most often in newcomer meetings. So newcomer meetings is when a newcomer couple shows up, which is just about every week. And what happens in that case is that people take turns, couples take turns, sharing their own experience. And the word that's used the most often is hope, right? This is a place of hope. It's a place we get coming. We need hope. It's very hopeful. It's not just about your relationship, right? It's about every aspect of life that's going to be affected. I think that's what appeals to people. There's this bit about anyway, there's one of the things that Elise and I experienced was very strange. So after a year or so, somebody came up to us and said, "I'd like you to be our sponsor couple. See something in you that we would like to have." That was an incredible moment because I just couldn't believe, I think I speak for Elise too, I couldn't believe that was true. That they had seen us at the beginning, they had seen us come in with a lot of despair and a lot of hurt. And the idea that these changes had happened over time, and that they were visible, and that somebody else wanted us to sort of guide them was just mind-blowing. That's typically what happens. Okay, so what time do we need to quit? I've kind of lost my sense of the time.
Yeah, about 6 or 7.
Okay. So the other thing that RCA offers, it's very practical, is a book called Creating Healthy Agreements. Because let's face it, it gets down to the nitty gritty, like who does the housework. That's where a lot of problems emerge, right? Last night at the meeting, somebody described a fight they had had that was about leaves. Everybody laughed, right? The fight wasn't about leaves. It just happened to be precipitated by something about leaves, right? This is how relationships go. So this book has agreements on household labor, fair fighting, sex. I can't think of the other ones, but these sort of the natural ones, right? That sometimes to get us out of a place of constant conflict, we need to have guidelines, we need to have rules and so forth. So here's where I'll leave us today, and how I ended up writing this book and giving it the name that it has. So Saturday nights, so Lisa and I have been going for 12 years, off and on. We don't go as often as to RCA as often as we used to, but for a while we went basically every week. And for me, those meetings were a spiritual high of my week. For several reasons. One is the hope that's already been mentioned, right? This was a place where you saw people gradually get healthier and healthier and become committed to each other and forgive each other and go forward. And also because you'd see newcomers come in and sort of despair and shame, and they'd slowly kind of join the group. We would go to dinner afterwards, a bunch of us. And these were really just sort of celebratory meetings where we eat and laugh and talk about stuff. And I really hated missing Saturday nights. Football season or not, I started to get really committed to these meetings. They were very important to me. And so then Sunday morning we come to church. And I love Idlewild. I love the people here. I love our little pew, right? Which is what, third from the front on the right, or whatever. Right? I love the relationships I have with people here. But we didn't feel like we could really talk about what was going on with us in those early years freely. The only people we could talk to were people who were also in RCA. They were also couples at Idlewild who were in RCA, but we didn't feel like we could out them. And we didn't feel like we could talk to them about our stuff here. It's really strange. So we'd see them on Saturday night in a Sunday school room at Shady Grove Presbyterian, and we talk about all our shit. And then we'd see each other Sunday morning all dressed up. Hey, I'm fine. Are you fine? Yeah, we're all fine. So that was a weird experience. And it really is what started me thinking about this question of why can't church be more like an AA? Why is there a disconnect for me between what I feel on Saturday night, what I experience, kind of connectedness and honesty and transparency I feel, and then what I feel on Sunday morning, even in a church where I feel very comfortable and always have. People have been extraordinarily accommodating to my family, and my kids have grown up here. I have nothing bad to say about Idlewild, but it's a church. And I don't think it's different than any other churches, honestly. Maybe there are churches where people don't feel that disconnect between the kind of experience I've described on Saturday nights with this feel on Sunday morning. I've never been in one. And I've been in a lot of churches over the years. I just think there's something about the way we do church, the way church has to be maybe, that makes it different. And so my next week I'll talk about the process that started for me in 2015 when I went on the search to find if there were any other Christians who felt the same way. Between 2015 and 2018, I visited dozens of different churches and church groups, and recovery groups around the country that were church-based, asking this question: what are some ways that church can become more like AA or incorporate some of the insights of AA? And how does it work? What does it require? What do you need? Do you need a recovery pastor? Do you need to have a bunch of meetings at the church that are well publicized? What is it? Do you need to change the name of your church to Recovery Church, like some churches have done? Do you need to have a special service on Thursday nights called a recovery service? And what does it take? It's not really clear. I don't think there's any obvious answer. But I've been really interested in trying to figure out what other Christians have been thinking about as a way to address this problem. I'll talk more more detail about that next week. You have any questions for quick?
I just have one question, which is kind of off the topic, but what about people that are just cannot, they don't have a God?
Yeah.
It's just not their,
Yeah,
that's not who they are.
it's tough. I have a couple of sponsees who were in that situation.
I didn't hear the question.
People that basically don't believe in God.
Oh,
So I have a couple of sponsees, one of whom used to be a Christian pastor and he's completely left the faith. His experience has been so traumatic and stuff. So how do you talk about a higher power and all that stuff with somebody like that? There are a lot of other people who they've just grown up without any kind of faith. And so how do you get past steps 2 and 3, right? Came to believe that power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Well, how much greater does that power have to be? Does it have to be divine? Can it be the group itself? Can it be nature? It's a real debated question. But here's the clincher, right? If it's the group or nature, how do you do step 3? Decided to turn our lives and our will over to the care of God as we understood God, right? It's got to be something great enough that you trust yourself entirely to. So rub comes there too. There are a lot of secular AA meetings. There are a lot of most meetings sort of finesse it. So they use the traditional language, just understanding that people are going to sort of just understand, deal with it the way they will. Most of the meetings that I'm familiar with, people are very, even if they're Christian, they're very sensitive, very respectful to others. They've learned, there's certain language you don't use. You don't talk about Jesus. You don't use churchy language. You talk about higher power. You talk about God, so in the steps. But you certainly don't proselytize, right? It's a really interesting question. I think it varies different parts of the country. So early days of AA, got me going now. Early days of AA, there's an Akron, Ohio group, and a New York group. There's 2 epicenters. The Akron group was very Christian. The New York group was very agnostic. And there was a lot of tension. There always has been.
so I wonder if someone, I'm sure it's based on the person themselves or the couple, but I wonder if someone that's a stronger believer has more success. I don't know.
There's been some research on that, and certainly if you talk in terms of spirituality, somebody who gets the spiritual part certainly has more success. If they get hung up on that, it's really tough. What you find though, sometimes with couples is that you get couples that are real mismatched spiritually. So what do you do then, right? They've got different gods, they've got different higher powers. Can you have a higher power for the coupleship? It's really hard. So that's one reason that doing the steps together can be complicated. When you talk about your own religious, it's really interesting for Lisa. We never really talked a lot about her growing up as a Methodist minister's kid and all the crap that went along with that, all the gossiping, the way her dad had been mistreated, and she was resentful. A lot of that came out. It's healthy, but my experience has been pretty good. It's like, I feel good about my family. So we had some issues there, some things to talk about.
Steve, we're out of time, but I have to go. But we did have a question from the chat. Please say more about cross-talking is negative. That style can be a creative idea, I think.
Yeah, that's a very churchy way of thinking about crosstalk, right? One of the things that I can talk about more next week is the difference between church culture, therapeutic culture, and recovery culture. There are really 3 different ways of thinking about interactions, right? So therapy, you know what that is. You sit, somebody kind of listens and kind of gives you feedback and stuff. And one person's the expert, the other person's there to kind of learn. Church is you typically have a leader, somebody who's designated as the teacher, and there's certain style of the way people interact. Recovery has a very specific culture. There are rules that are very, it seems sort of chaotic. It seems like anything goes, it doesn't, right? There's a certain, even though there's a different leader at every meeting, even though you may show up and there's no leader and you end up being the leader, there's a certain rules that you stand by. And crosstalk is really sacrosanct. I think the idea is that if you think about alcoholics, especially, one of the features of alcoholism that was most clear to the early AA people was grandiosity. They just think they know everything. They think their advice is really valuable, right? So this is in part a protection against grandiosity. And let's face it, in the church, a lot of times grandiosity plays very well, right? Our ministers, that's part of what a minister does, right? Minister is charismatic, minister knows everything. We kind of feed that. We don't really have a celebrity minister culture like a lot of church minister culture, like a lot of churches do. But there's a sense in which for recovery to work in a church, it's got to be leaderless. It's got to be, the pastor can't be in charge of it. You can't have trained leaders doing it because it just gets away from this idea that it's not a hierarchy, and it's not, the person with the most sobriety and the person with the most wisdom is the person who got up earliest that morning. That's sort of an AA saying, right? The person with the most sobriety is the person who got up earliest. In other words, it's one day at a time. Just because you have 30 years doesn't mean you're any smarter than anybody else. I don't know if that answers the question for the person, but I just will say it's the quickest way to get in trouble in an AA meeting or any other meeting, is to cross up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Good to see everybody. Glad you're here.